Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to today's Hi5 seminar. Today we have an excellent talk. I got to get a sneak preview of it yesterday from Mr. Mohammed Safayet Arefin from Mississippi State University. He's a PhD student there and is doing some excellent research in augmented reality. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Arifin and take it from here, my friend. I'm turning off my video.
Sure. I think it's showing the. I have to share my screen, right?
Yeah, there we go. I gotta enable. There we go. You should be good.
Okay, so the screen is clear soon, right? Okay, good afternoon,
Yep, you got it.
everyone. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Arefin. I'm a PhD student at the Computer Science and Engineering Department of Mississippi State University. I'm from a Spatial Perception and Augmented Reality Lab. The lab is led by Dr. Ed Swan, Professor of Computer Science and Engineering, Mississippi State University. He's my advisor. And here are some random pictures from our lab. And from the pictures, you can make a sense that most of the project we do that involves spatial perception, display calibration, and display technologies. And in most of the studies, we try to utilize perception and technology that are required to give virtual objects a definite spatial locations. So among various projects, today I'll talk about the impact of AR display context switching and focal distance switching on human performance for application on an AR Haploscope. So in this talk, I'll discuss about the context switching issue, focal distance switching issue, and I'll talk about a little bit about the AR Haploscope, and I will explain how we successfully replicated an experiment on an AR Haploscope. So let's start with the context switching. So in augmented reality system, information often distributed between the real world and the virtual information. And if the user's tasks require them to integrate information both from the real world and virtual information, then he needs to switch his focus from one context to another context. And this switching visual and cognitive attention between real world and virtual information is known as context switching. And this switching task is perceptually demanding, and also it has some performance consequences. So look at these pictures. In this picture, you can see that a person is doing some sort of maintaining task, is wearing a AR headset, and he has some virtual information in front of him, but he has different real world objects. So in order to perform his task properly, he needs to switch his attention or visual focus from real world object to the virtual information or vice versa. And that brings the issue of context switching. So before moving to the issue of focal distance switching, I want to talk about a little bit about current commercially available optical see-through AR displays. So based on the human perception of the virtual image, we can divide that in two categories, like monocular display and the stereo display. In monocular display, with just one set of optics is needed to display the virtual information, whereas in the stereo display, we need two set of optics available, and see that two set of optics will display the virtual image, and user will see a fused virtual image in front of him. But unfortunately, most of the currently available AR headset has a fixed focal distance, and that is ranging between 1.25 meter to 2.5 meter. But when using optical see-through AR display, user need to focus at the focal depth of the display to observe the virtual image. But real world object do not have any fixed focal distance. It can appear at any distance from the user, and which brings the issue of focal distance switching. So focal distance switching means accommodating between two focal distance to see information with sharp focus. For example, you are using an AR headset and you have information, virtual information at certain distance, and you have a real world object that is located at another distance. So if you want to integrate information both from the objects, then you need to switch your eye focus from one particular focal length of the real world object to another particular focal distance of the virtual information. And it's continuously shifting your eye focus between one particular focal distance to another particular focal distance, eventually degrade your test performance, reduce your comfort, and also increase your eye fatigue. So look at this picture. These pictures are taken from a YouTube video. That video describing the concept of Google Glass. And from that video, we found that when user focus on the background, the foreground AR content that displayed through the AR headset becomes blurred. And when user focus on the foreground, the background is totally blurred. So, we didn't find, most of the times we found that is either one in focus, other is blur, or very often both of them are in focus. So always you see that there is a switching things are happening while using the AR display. So this both context switching and focal distance switching have a strong correlation with two important terms of the human visual system, accommodation and vergence. Accommodation means the ability of the eye to adjust its focal length, and to focus an object at different distances, our eye needs to rotate. So in order to focus an object at a near distance, user's eye need to rotate inward, which is termed as convergence. And in order to rotate an object at far distance, our eye needs to rotate outwards, which is known as divergence. And so vergence and accommodation are coupled with each other, and any mismatch between those two can occur, reduce user performance or increasing cognitive load, or create eye strain among the user. So when we observe a real image or real object that is on normal viewing, there is the binocular disparity and focal blur cues are consistent, and we found that vergence distance and focal demand are equal, and that's really fine. But as most of the display have a fixed focal plane, and there is a chance of vergence accommodation mismatch because the focal blur cue is fixed to the focal depth of the display, and focal binocular disparity varies, and it can cause accommodation and vergence mismatch, and which eventually reduce user performance and comfort. Furthermore, changing accommodation takes time. That means, I'm talking that you need to switch your eye focus from one particular focal distance to another particular focal distance. So as you switch from near to far, far to near, it takes a certain time. So if your age is up to 20, accommodate from far to near, it takes about 360 milliseconds. And if you want to accommodate from near to far, it takes 380 milliseconds. And if your age is beyond 20, so accommodate from far to near, it takes more than 360 milliseconds, but accommodation time from near to far is consistent with 380 milliseconds. So based on our knowledge, we found that only one paper so far considered the effect of AR display context switching and focal distance switching on human performance together. And that paper is from Gavard, Meher, and so on in 2018. And they have used a monocular microvision nomad AR display. And this display is very old, very unique. It is a laser-based display, but this display can change the focal demand. It has the capability of changing the focal demand. And also they used a text-based visual search task in their experiment. And from their experiment, we found that they found a significant impact of context switching and focal distance switching on human performance as well as on the user eye fatigue. But that previous work have some certain limitations, like the display they use that is very old, it has a low resolution, and user will not feel good when observing a far virtual image through that low resolution display. And also, they considered the relative size skew in their experiment, so that they consider far distance, and they consider the latest size for the far distance, and they bring that latest size to the near, and that means that when the near distance, that latest size looks very big. But according to Cutting and Wishton, that if you use the relative size skew, then the object cannot be too large or too near. Another important limitations of their experiment is that there are some missing cells in their experimental design. So this table is taken from their paper. This is a real world to real world conditions. And from this table, you can see that they only considered the mesh distance in real world to real world conditions, and other distance other cells are empty. So they didn't fully cross the variables while analyzing the result. So these are another limitations of their previous work. So after addressing the problem like context switching and focal distance switching and the limitations of the previous work, we set three research goals for our experiment. So the first research goal is that we want to replicate the previous experiment, that means the previous task and the experiment of Gavard, Meyer, and so on a different display on the AR Augmented Reality Haploscope. Now, our target is to broadly generalize the impact of context switching and focal distance switching issues in AR user interface design, because there's an assumption maybe that, okay, the results they found maybe only belongs to that display. So our target is to, okay, we'll replicate that. Whether we will find the same results or not, let's see what's happened. So our second goal is that we want to extend the monocular condition to the stereo condition. We want to see whether the effect of context switching and focal distance switching still exists in the stereo condition or not. And if so, if it exists, then we want to compare, okay, how it varies between the monocular condition and the stereo condition. So in this talk, I will only talk about the replication. I will focus on the replication studies and the monocular condition, how we did the replication successfully. I will talk in details about this. So I will focus on only the research goal 1 in this talk. So before moving to the experiment, I want to talk about a little bit about the replication in empirical research. So the experimental studies for research can be divided into two types, like exploratory studies and the confirmatory studies. So the goal of exploratory studies is to bring possible new ideas and innovations in a research field, whereas the confirmatory studies confirms a previous finding or result by replicating a prior research, and which brings the replication. That means replication offers us an opportunity to confirm a finding from the prior research, and it do one of the following, like verify, validate, and generalize the previous research. And also, Casper mentioned that if you do a replication study, the study must do at least one of the following. Either it will confirm the findings of the earlier study, or it will extend the prior research, or it will generalize the outcomes of the previous analysis. Also, the replication studies can be divided into like strict replication, partial replication, conceptual replication in many types. So if you want to know more about this replication studies, you can look at this paper to learn more. So the replication studies is not new. Researchers in other fields, for example, biology, medicine, psychology, so they are doing replication studies for many decades. But replication study has not got enough attention. The researchers from our field, specifically AR and VR. I hope that this experiment will encourage them to do more replication studies in our field. So let's move to our experiment, and let's start with the apparatus. And for this experiment, we have used a very unique apparatus, and that is an augmented reality haploscope. So from the pictures, you can see that AR Haploscope is a tabletop optical see-through display, and that has the capability to display virtual image separately for each eye in a very controlled way. So this augmented haploscope works very similar to our human visual system. It has the ability to adjust a wide range of IPD. So in the pictures, you can see that there is a rail carriers there. You can move the rail carriers along the x-axis, and you can set up the IPD of the participants in the display. Also, it has the ability to provide a certain versus demand to the participants. So here you can see that it has a rotatable assembly on the left side and a rotatable assembly on the right side. And so when you rotate the left wing and right wing, you are giving the user a certain amount of versus demand. Furthermore, it has the capability of changing the accommodation demand or focal demand dynamically. So it is not like the traditional AR display. By changing the accommodation lens, you can see in the picture there's the accommodation lens. So you can change the accommodation lens, and you can provide different focal demand to the participants during the experiment. And the right picture, the front view of our haploscope, you can see that user is using the AR haploscope. And the bottom picture showing that he is observing some virtual textual information in front of him in the real world. this is actually the lens diagram of our AR haploscope, and from the diagram you can see that it is configured based on the geometrical optics. So the virtual object, it is generated from the monitor. But one thing I want to mention that the left side of the haploscope and the right side of the haploscope works in the identical way. So the virtual object will be displayed on the monitor. It will go through a minimization lens, that is the plano concave lens, and according to the thin lens formula, it will generate a virtual image, and that virtual image will further go through a collimation lens, that is a plano convex lens, and it will make the virtual image collimated. And after that, we can use biconcave, that is our accommodation lens, and we can put the virtual image on different focal demand by changing the accommodation lens, and user will observe the virtual object through the beam splitter. So one of the most challenging tasks of using or working with this display is the calibration, because the calibration of this optical configuration is very important in order to remove the lens distortion and in order to see the virtual information in focus and in a clear way. So we started with the structural calibration, that is that we make sure that the table is flat and every component of the haploscope is balanced with respect to the gravity. After that, we are using the dioptometer to do the dioptometer calibration to position every lens component or every optical component of the haploscope at its appropriate position so that there is no focus blur is there. And finally, we actually verify our calibration using a laser, and laser, we can say that that is a laser-based calibration system. So we set the laser beam and it hits the center of each of the optical component, it hits the center of the monitor, and that's how we actually verify our calibration. And if you want to know more about the design assembly calibration of this AR haploscope, you can look at this paper. I hope you will like it. So aside from the haploscope, we have used some other apparatus, like for displaying the real information, we have used a physical monitor, and also we have used a very high resolution haploscope monitor to display the virtual image. We have used a numeric keypad to gather information from the participants. So now let me talk about the experimental task. So as I mentioned that we are doing switching from real to AR, and also we are doing switching from one particular distance to another particular distance. So we need to select a task that gives us an opportunity to integrate information both from the real world and also from the AR world. So, we found that previously Gavard in his paper, in his experiment, used a text-based visual search task. So we actually use that text-based visual search task in our experiment, and we have a set of left text and we have a set of right text. And each set of left text and right text will have 3 strings, and each strings will have 6 letters. And one thing I want to mention that the left text will be always displayed on a physical monitor, and that will be our real world information. But the right text will be displayed either on a physical monitor or will be displayed through the AR haploscope based on the experimental condition. So the left text will be always real, and the right text either it will be real or it will be augmented through the haploscope. So this task, so I will explain later why I'm talking that this is a subtask. So this task has actually 2 steps. First of all, user need to focus on the left text, and he needs to find the target letter. So the target letter is the side-by-side identical letters, and here the target letter is O. So after getting the target letter from the left text, user need to switch his focus to the right text and count it how many times it appears on the right text. So in this case, you can see that the target letter O appears once. That means user correct answer will be 1. So we'll give user similar this kind of task 5 times. That's why we are telling that this is a 5 subtask. So this 5 subtask will give to the user within a time limit of 25 seconds. So user need to complete this 5 subtask, and within the 25 seconds, and we'll count that as a full task. So that's why this is a subtask, and 5 subtasks make a full task, and we're giving a time pressure in the experiment that is 25 seconds. And the next question is, okay, we are using a text-based visual search task, how we will display the latest science to the participants. So in our case, we have considered constant visual angle of 0.37 degree, and we found this value according to the FFA human factors, and they are telling that the preferred visual angle for text legibility is 22 arc minute. So we consider that this is 0.37 degree for each of the three distance level, near, medium, and far, and we'll see the information like this in our three distance level, near, medium, and far, considering the constant visual angle. So the next question is, okay, we have the left text and the right text, how we can display this to the participants. So we considered the geometrical calculations to standardize the horizontal eye scanning at three distances. So at first we put the left text and right text side by side, and we measured the angle between the center of the right text to the eye and center of the left text to the eye. And the angle between these two is like 26.22 degree. We made this value constant for medium distance and also for the far distance. And using the geometrical calculation, we found the distance, side-by-side distance between the two textual information. So as you know that there are different kind of fonts are available, but in our experiment, we are considering a very popular sans serif font, which is good for the readability for print media, and also preferred the participants during the reading task from the computer display. And we also did our whole experiment in a dark room, because from the previous work, we found that dark mode in AR system significantly increased the user's visual acuity during the experiment. That's why we consider the dark room condition in our experiment. So the whole experiment was done in a dark room. So now I'll talk about the experimental, experimental variables. That means which variables we have manipulated. That means our independent variables, and which variables we measured. That is our dependent variables. So these are our independent variables, and you can see that we have considered 5 independent variables. First of all is the stereopsis. So we have a monocular and the stereo condition. It has 2 levels. We have context switching on and context switching off condition. That has 2 levels. So what does actually context switching on means and context switching off means? So when one information is real and another information is AR or virtual, that moment we are telling that, okay, this is context switching on condition. And when both information are real, then we are telling that, okay, this is context switching off condition. So in context switching on, we have one information real, another information virtual, and context switching off, we have both information are real. We have 3 different distance levels, both for the left text and the right text, near, medium, and far. And we considered 5 repetitions in our experiment. That means we will have a 180 task for each participant. And as I mentioned that each task has 5 subtasks, that means we will have 900 subtasks for each participant, and all the experimental variables here are counterbalanced during the experiment. And these are the dependent variables, and that variables we have measured during our experiment. The first one is subtask completion. So we have measured how many subtasks were completed by the participants during the experiment, and the subtask accuracy, that how many subtasks are corrected by the participants. And after completing a certain number of tasks, we are asking the participants to rate their eye fatigue subjectively. And there is a 7-point bipolar scale, and that ranges from 1 to 7. 1 means, okay, very relaxed, and 7 is very fatigued. And we also consider the error metric in our analysis. So the error means the difference between the participant count and the correct count. So you'll have a response from the participant, and you also know the correct count. If the difference between these two is 0, that means, okay, that is a correct, there is a no error there. If the error less than 0, that means participant did undercount during the experiment. And if the error greater than 0, that means participant did overcount during the experiment. So we have considered within subject experimental design in our experiment. That means each participant observed each experimental condition. So this is the table of our experimental design. So the top table showing the real wall to real wall condition, that is context switching off condition. And the bottom table showing the real wall to AR condition, that is context switching on condition. And each table has 9 possible distance combinations. So in total, we have 18 possible distance combination, and all of them are unique, and participants observe all of them. So in the previous studies, you have seen that they have considered only the match distance. So we have considered both the match and the mismatch distance in our experiment. So we have the ability to fully cross the variables and analyze the impact of context switching and focal distance switching in our experiment. And the real world to real world condition, that is the context switching off condition, that means when both information are real, we consider that as a control condition in our experiment. So this is actually the side view of our experimental setup, and the top picture showing that user is observing a virtual information through the AR Haploscope, and you can see that left text is displayed through a physical monitor because that is our real information at 4 meter, and virtual text is displayed through the AR Haploscope at 2 meter, and user will observe a virtual information similar to the right pictures. And you can see that I'm written context switching on because one information is at the real, another information is displayed through the AR Haploscope, and focal distance switching on because two information are at two different distance levels. So one is at the 4 meter, another is at the 2 meter. In the bottom pictures, you can see that user observing that both textual information through the Haploscope and both information were displayed on a physical monitor. That means both information are real. And in that condition, that is context switching off condition because both information are real and both information are presented at the same distance level, that is 2 meter. So there, user do not need to do any focal distance switching, so that there is a no focal distance switching on condition. So when there is a mismatch between the left text position and the right text position, we consider that focal distance switching on. And when both are at the same level, that we consider focal distance switching off. So in our experiment, we have considered 24 participants. We have equal number of male and female participants with a mean IPD of 63.1 millimeter. But most of the participants in our experiment are very young. They have a mean age of 23 years, about 23 years. And among those, 17 participants right eye dominant and 7 participants left eye dominant. So in the previous experiment, only the right eye dominant people can participate, but in our experiment, there's no restriction for the eye dominance. So people with left eye dominant as well as people with right eye dominant can participate in our experiment. And we measured the eye dominant by considering the Porter test. So we can have up to 4,320 tasks or 21,600 subtasks to evaluate our whole study. So now I will focus on the results and I will talk about the results of the replication part, that is our monocular condition. So let's start with the impact of context switching on task completion and accuracy. So this is actually the visual representation of our result. The x-axis showing 3 different distance levels, near, medium, and far. Y-axis, the upper grid of the y-axis showing that the number of tasks completed by the participants, and the lower y-axis showing the number of tasks corrected by the participants. The light gray bar showing that context switching off condition, that means both information are real, and the deep gray bar showing the context switching on condition, that means when one information is real, another information is AR. So from the graph, you can see that there is no significant difference between the user performance at near and medium distance, but at the far distance, participants' performance and the accuracy actually degrade. And we did repeated measures and analysis at the 5% significance level, and we found that, yes, there is no significant impact of context switching on task completion and accuracy at near and medium distance, but at the far distance, there is a significant impact. So the same results or some similar sort of results are found by Gabbard, Meyer, and Swan in their experiment. They found that there is no impact of context switching at near and medium distance, but at far distance, there is a significant impact of context switching both on task completion and accuracy. The second thing, we want to analyze the eye fatigue and the impact of context switching of eye fatigue. The left graph is the results from the Gabbard, Meher, and Swan experiment, and the right graph is the results from our experiment. And there's x-axis showing 3 different distance level, and the light gray bar showing the real, that is our context switching off condition. Deep gray bar is showing our context switching on condition. And from the graph, you can see that when context switching is on, that means user have a higher eye fatigue compared to context switching off condition. And from our statistical analysis, repeated measures and over analysis, we found that they are significant in all 3 distance levels. Now I move to the result of focal distance switching. So these are the results, the impact of focal distance switching, similar um, graphical representation. The x-axis showing three different distance level, upper grade showing number of completed tasks, and lower grade showing number of corrected tasks by the participants. Light gray bar showing context switching no, that means the distance are at the same level, and focal distance switching yes, that means the distances are different. So in all three distance level, you can see that when the focal distance switching is yes, participant performance degrades. That means participant did very well when both information are at the same level. And also, when we consider the eye fatigue, we found that when the amount of focal distance switching increased, the eye fatigue also increased linearly. So the first bar, that is a light bar, that is the amount of focal distance switching is zero. That means both are at the same distance. And we have a very low fatigue. I found very low fatigue from the participant on that condition. But when the amount of focal distance switching increased, participants' eye fatigue also increased linearly. And these findings also supported by the statistical analysis. So this is, I think, at least for me, this is one of the coolest finding of our experiment. So this is not the same graph. These are two different graphs. The left graph is from the data from Gabbard, Mayer, and so on, and the right graph is from the data from our Haploscope, and it's showing the interaction effect. I mean, similar interaction effect in both experiments. So what kind of interaction effect we are trying to explore here? So we want to see the interaction effect of focal distance switching and the target letter in first line. So the previous experiment made a hypothesis that when we need focal distance switching, and if the target letter appears at the first line, participant will do more undercount. So we actually support the hypothesis, and we also want to see if the hypothesis is supported by our experiment or not. So in both experiments, we have found that the consistent result for that hypothesis. In the next slide, I will explain that more, actually, what actually interaction effect and what we are actually trying to measure from these two variables. So as I mentioned that we have the left text, we have the right text, and left text is positioned at 4 meters, for example, here, and the right text is positioned at near distance at 0.67 meter. User task is to focus on the left text at first, find the target letter, and switch back to the right text and count it how many times it appears. And I also mentioned that changing accommodation takes time. That means if you changing your accommodation from far to near, it takes a certain amount of time, and that is about 360 milliseconds. And we are giving time pressure to the participants. So participant wants to do quickly, get the target letter, and brings his focus to the right text to count it. So participant, as the experiment is time pressured, participants quickly switches focus from the left text to the right text after getting the target letter, but the time to accommodation, 360 milliseconds, is not fully complete. So participant will have initial blur when they focus back to the near distance, and when they fully get the sharp right text or focus right text within the 360 milliseconds when the time limit is completed. In the meantime, their eye case will move from the first line to the second line. So in this scenario, if any target letter appears on the first line, the participant will definitely miss that target letter and they will do the undercount. So that's the hypothesis. When we need the focal distance switching, and if the target letter appears on the first line, the participant will do more undercount. So because changing accommodation takes time, also we are providing a time pressure to the participants. So when participant moves to the right text, there is initial blur, he missed the first line, and then he moves to the second line, he can see the sharp or focus right text, and if the target later appears on the first line, then he will miss it. So we found that interaction effect, and that interaction effect is supported by statistically, and that is F-value with 24.27, and both our work and the previous work have the same consistent results. We have, along with the main effects of focal distance switching and target letter in the first line of text. So finally, I can say that we have successfully replicated the task and experiment of Gabbard, Mayer, and so on in this experiment. And we found that there is a significant impact of context switching and focal distance switching on user performance and fatigue. And we can say that context switching and focal distance switching are general optical see-through AR design issues. As I mentioned before, that there's an assumption that maybe the finding of that paper belongs to only this nomad vision display, but we replicate that experiment on a very different display in AR Haploscope, and we're having we are having the consistent results, and that means that these findings broadly generalize to the optical see-through AR user interfaces. So there are some certain limitations in our experiment. For example, our haploscope is capable of only display the virtual information in a perpendicular direction. It cannot put the virtual information at any other particular angular direction. And participants are not allowed to move their head during the experiment, but in normal condition, in real, if you use a display, you want to move your head. And we found that participants with the bifocal corrective glasses or lens found difficulties to perform the experiment. So we have some plan for the future work, and the next we want to analyze the participants' reaction time or response time during context switching and focal distance switching. So according to the cognitive psychology, the reaction time or response time means when you perceive something and when you respond to it, the time between these two. So in our experiment, you can say that, okay, when participant look at the left text, he perceived the target letter, he switched back to the right text and responds with a number. So we want to measure that time. We want to analyze that reaction time during context switching and focal distance switching in future. And another thing we want to include in the future is the age effect. Basically, this graph encourages us to consider this. This is a graph from the human eye book. And in the graph, you can see that the x-axis showing different age and y-axis showing different accommodative ability. So in previous studies, we found that accommodative ability of human visual system decreases with increasing age. And here in these pictures or in the graph, you can see that as the age increase, the accommodative ability decrease. So in our experiment, most of the participants are young. They have a mean age of 23 years. But if we consider another set of participants with older people, and I want to say that how the accommodative ability impact on this situation, that will be very cool. And the third thing is measuring participant performance with various complex and dynamic backgrounds. So in our experiment, you see that we have putting the white text on a static black background, but real world is very complex and very dynamic. Different objects, different shapes, lighting, various stuffs need to be considered. So in future, we want to thinking of using a dynamic background for this experiment. Also, we want to measure the participants' visual eye fatigue objectively. So we have getting the subjective rating from the participants. Maybe in future, we can consider the pupil size in order to measure the visual eye fatigue of the participants. So these are a couple of the reference of my talk. So the abstracts of this work have published as published in IEEE VR, and we got the Best Poster Honorable Mention Award from that conference. And if you want to know or learn more about this work, you can look at my master's thesis, which is available online. And hopefully we'll have our full paper very soon. Finally, I want to thank the collaborator, Dr. Alex Plosky from University of Otago and Dr. Joe Gabbard from Virginia Tech for their help and intellectual contribution on this project. And I would also like to acknowledge National Science Foundation, NSF, for their support on this project. Finally, I'd like to thank Dr. Adam Jones and all the members of Hi5 Lab for arranging this summer virtual seminar. I'm really glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about our research. And that's all from my side. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me.
All right. This would normally be where we would thank our speaker if we were in person. So I'm going to thank him on all of your behalf, because I'm sure you're clapping at home right now. And pardon me, I actually minimized my chat window. So let's see if we have any questions looming out there from the audience. So not quite yet, but I do have a couple questions for you. First,
Sure.
Arfin, thank you for giving this talk. It's awesome. I always love seeing the work that you guys are doing. A
Yes,
mutual
thank you.
colleague of ours, Gurjot Singh, in the paper he published in 2018, which I have absolute confidence that you've read. He found an effect of improved depth perception, I believe it was, in older individuals because of a lack of ability to accommodate with age. Uh,
Hmm.
what kind
Yeah.
of bearing do you think that would have if you're just speculate, just guess,
Okay.
on this study if you extended it to have an age control?
Um, so this the accommodative ability in our case, I can say that you are switching from one distance to another distance. And Gurjat experiment, you have a depth. You need to doing the depth matching task, and so you can do that, but you don't need to do any switching there. In this case, you need to do the switching, and the the hypothesis is that the accommodative ability decrease means that the ciliary muscle of the human eye decrease. It gets weakened. So in our experiment, we are doing the switching task. Gujarat experiment do not have any switching task. He actually considered the real object and virtual object, and we need to do the depth perception, depth matching task. So user will do the depth matching task. So in that particular difference, that okay, as we are doing the switching between two particular focal distance, that could have impact on the age. That's the hypothesis as we are doing the switching. Yeah, and that's true that in case of the depth perception, he has no significant difference between the young participant and the age participant. But as we are having a switching task, switching the accommodation, so that's why I'm thinking that maybe there is a fact of the age.
Cool, cool. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with that. So, looking at the plots of comparing uh, Joe Gabbard's work and
Mm-hmm.
your current work, and it was very obvious that you had very similar patterns, but
Mm-hmm.
the raw numbers, the number of I believe it was incompletes or undercounts or something like that, uh,
Yes.
were different than each other. And looks like his subjects performed a little worse. Do you have any speculation on why those were different?
Okay, so one of the reason could be that the display, because we have, as I mentioned, that display is very unique, but it is very old, and the display quality, in terms of the resolution, that is very low resolution,
Mm.
and that can be, and it is also a laser-based display, and so that is one of the issue because the monitor we are using currently on our Haploscope is full HD, and it is not low resolution display, so it's a high resolution it has, and that can make an impact on this case. Like maybe because in his paper, participants complaining that the far distance they're observing blur. In our case, they sometimes they complain, but I think that the display quality matters in this case. So the display they have used and display we are using, though they are different, but the resolution is actually better in our case compared to their case.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So last chance for questions from the audience. Just so you guys know, there's about a 20 second delay from when we speak and when you guys hear us. So we're gonna fill those 20 seconds with a little bit of yammering here. Very cool work, dude. I like it.
Thanks.
I do have a
Thanks.
question for you, and you might have said it and I just missed it. Were you scaling the size of the real world stimuli as you moved that real world monitor forward and backward?
Oh, yes. So we considered the letter size,
Yeah.
not the full textual information. We considered each individual letter size.
Yep.
So we considered that, okay, we want to put that as a constant visual angle so that, so we consider letter size on that sense, considering a constant visual angle of 0.37 degree, so that if you ask me what is the letter size of each, what is the letter size actually? So I can say that, okay, this letter size is 0.37 degree. So that is actually constant for the near, medium, and far. So the far distance, you'll see the, I mean, text readable letter size, and the near distance becomes smaller. And becomes smaller, it doesn't make that it's not clear, or it's actually text, it is actually clear to read, but it maintaining the constant visual angle of 0.367 degrees. So it is not very big at the near, and if you move far, it will get very comfortable, not like this. So it's considering the constant visual angle at each three distance level.
Yeah. So you kept the size of the projection on the retina the same essentially.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes,
Gotcha.
yes.
Gotcha.
So yeah, like same constant visual angle. Yes.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Doesn't look like we have any questions from the audience. So with that, I'm gonna thank you, Arifin, for coming and
Oh,
speaking with us
thanks.
today.
Thanks, and thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here, and it's very exciting. And thanks for arranging this summer virtual seminar. It's very
Hey,
exciting.
I didn't get to see as many of you guys this year in person as I normally would. It's been well over a year since I saw you last in person, and I'm glad to see you're doing well. And thank you for doing this with us today.
Oh, thanks a lot.
All right. Okay, folks, we're going to conclude the stream there. We hope you're doing well out there in cyberspace, and take care.